So what origin of life researchers do is they immediately stop the experiment. They terminate the experiment when they get just what they want, because if it goes like 1 second longer, it would immediately scramble whatever they came up with. It's just, talk about sleight of hand.
Greetings to the brightest audience in the country. This is Real Science Radio. I'm Fred Williams.
And I'm Doug McBurney, Bible student, science geek, amateur comedian. Fred, it's always great to be back with you talking about real science on Friday. And this week, we're going to get to part 2 of David James, popularly known as Professor Dave. We're going to get to part 2 of his video series, Debunking Creationist Talking Points. I cannot wait.
Yeah, and it's on abiogenesis. His second video installment is on abiogenesis. And Doug, before we dive into that, I wanted to mention from last week's show, in part 1 of his video, there was a part at the end that we skipped because it's just the usual storytelling, but I did want to mention it. He repeats the old canard that there's no evidence for a global flood. And this is despite literally scores of evidence to the contrary, and maybe one of the most popular, and because it's easy to understand, and that's the fact that you find marine life on all the major mountain ranges. Mm-hmm. And most of the time, it's like clams, sea life, and you find clams that are in closed position. That means they were buried alive. So if you ever go to the beach with your family and you're picking up seashells, and some of them are closed, and you bring them into your hotel room, well, guess what? Why does it start to smell like fish? It's because you just brought into your room live clam. And when they die, they open up. The shells open up and the things decay and die. It happens in my saltwater tank at home. And so the fact that they're closed, often closed, that means they were buried alive. And you find this all over the globe. You find them in the gravel at Home Depot. You can find them in your backyard. Mm-hmm. So they're all over the place, all over the globe.
Yeah.
So billions of dead things buried by water all over the earth, as Ken Ham quips.
Yeah.
The evidence for the global flood is overwhelming. Mm-hmm. You've got evidence of these different layers all over the globe that they call the geologic column. But guess what? All of these layers, often you see as flat gaps. You see a line of once alleged millions of years, and then some millions of years later, another layer on top of it. Yet there's a flat line. So water's pretty corrosive, Doug, and they're saying that there's been no erosion for millions of years between these gaps. It's a serious problem. We didn't get into that because we only have so much time.
Yes.
But I did want to mention it because he mentions it towards the end of his part 1 of his video.
Yeah.
And he did get one criticism right, Doug.
Uh-oh.
That he did get one right. He said that catastrophic plate tectonics has a huge heat problem. I mean, guess what? We're in agreement with him on that and other really quick criticisms he did of CPT. And he did throw in, some Christian creationists say that the water came from beneath the surface of the earth. Well, guess what? There's a lot of evidence for that as well. We've covered that for years on Real Science Radio. We have lots of shows on the hydroplate theory. You can go to hydroplate.org, and there's all kinds of videos. We had a hydroplate conference last year, and Doug, you presented on the moon. It was fantastic. There's evidence everywhere for the hydroplate theory, everywhere, not just Earth, also space, outer space. We've done lots of shows on why, these meteors and asteroids, they're floating rock piles. Why? Because they came from the fountains of the great deep. You find them with moons. You find them with all kinds of life that you can only find on Earth. We ran that short, that Bennu, remember the asteroid Bennu and Astro Alexandra? She doesn't know it, but she works for Real Science Radio and Walt Brown.
Yeah.
Because she mentions how Bennu has a rock on it that we mostly only find in the mid-oceanic ridges where the fountains of the great deep burst forth, this crack that went around the globe.
Yeah.
So we left out a lot from that part 1 of his video because we only have so much time. In fact, it took us 2 shows to go through his part 1 video, where now we're going to tackle part 2 on abiogenesis.
Yes, but before we do, I didn't actually present on the moon. I was on the Earth, Fred. I don't want people to start thinking that I've faked some sort of moon landing. I was on the Earth, but I was addressing the moon and the possibility that the man in the moon looks like he does because chunks of the Earth actually hit the moon when the fountains of the great deep broke forth. And folks should check that out online. If you just Google Doug McBurney, the moon, it'll take you to the Hydroplate website, the Hydroplate conference website, and definitely check that out. And so here we go, Fred.
All right, so we're going to get into part 2 of David James, his alleged reputation of creationist talking points on abiogenesis. So, this particular show, we probably can get all this done in one show, Doug, because there's already so much material out there refuting Professor Dave on abiogenesis. He already got torched by renowned scientist Dr. James Tour, and what an honor it was to have him on Real Science Radio. I think that was back in January, and we had just gotten our feet wet with the whole YouTube audience. And so you can go back and watch our show with Dr. James Tour. And in fact, Doug, let's play a clip right now. It's a 1-minute short that Dr. James Tour did, and it's on abiogenesis.
I am going to take down all the content on my YouTube channel where I've critiqued Origin of Life on one condition. The condition is this: I am going to name 10 key researchers that have published key papers in the area of Origin of Life, and I'm going to give all 10 of you a chance to answer 5 essential questions that need to be answered for Origin of Life to be solved. What are these 5 questions? Well, they're the same 5 questions that I put up on a recent debate that some YouTubers have said have already been solved. Show me the prebiotic chemistry that would do this coupling.
This scheme is what James wanted me to write on the board.
If their answer is good, take their answer. I'd like to see you, as a researcher in the Origin of Life community, take their answer and present that as a solution. All 5 have to be answered to have a model for the Origin of Life. You just answer one, and I'll take down all my content.
Okay, Doug, that was pretty cutting, right to the point, and no one's really been able to take him up on that challenge. And he's had a debate at Harvard, and he also debated Professor Dave, our own David James.
Yep.
And that was tough to watch, Doug. I don't know about you, but it was hard to stomach just because of the way he treated such a respected scientist as Dr. James Tour, a scientist, by the way, who won Scientist of the Year, and that was from a secular source. It's not so. This guy's does a lot of impressive work. He's got great research on cancer, by the way. You can go back and watch our show with Dr. James Tour, part 2, where he talks about his work in cancer and some really encouraging research that against cancers such as pancreatic cancer, and they've got a technique that's showing really good promise. So it was tough to watch such a kind man too. He's really a generous person and brilliant, obviously very brilliant. He's a top scientist in the world.
Yeah.
And watching Professor Dave act the way he did against Dr. James Tour.
Yeah, that was just rude. I didn't watch it. I actually listened to it while I was doing some yard work, and it was painful. It was as if it was basically an adult and a bratty adolescent. And that's really hard to listen to because you could, if you listen to it, you could feel the tension building in the adult. And you were just thinking, at some point, James Tour is going to grab this punk and give him a spanking. It was like, so, but he is a kind man and he restrained himself. Although that what you just played, that was a pretty good spanking of anyone claiming that they've debunked creationist claims about abiogenesis.
Yeah. And so before we jump into his part 2 video, I did want to show some clips, just some really brief clips from that debate to show you what we're talking about in his behavior. And, you know, one of the clips I don't need to show, but at the very start of the video, Dr. James Tour presents him with a image of Professor Dave that was done using graphene. It was a real honorable gesture. It's kind of a way to start the debate. And here's a gift for you. And you would think that might soften someone up to maybe remove some of those talking points that he had, that he probably worked out with fellow angry atheists, but it didn't. It didn't deter him. So let's just play a few of those clips from his antics in the debate with Professor James Tour, a real professor.
James is a chemist and also an apologist who lies about origin of life research on the internet. It's quite the double life. In order to understand why he does this, we turn to his faith. James has admitted publicly that he is a creationist. So that's a brief summary of James' tour. He's a toxic individual and pathological liar who actively promotes science denial and slanders diligent researchers. And he will be made accountable for his lies for everyone to see. Yes, it's amino acids.
Okay, go to the equation of that.
I don't,
Go to the equation of
I don't
that.
have that one. But you're just lying. You're also
No, I'm not
shifting the
lying. I'll show
goalposts,
you the
though.
paper.
Now, again, remember, I'm demonstrating conclusively that James is a pathological liar. This is important because James also lies about science that goes over most people's heads. So by proving to you what a liar he is, you are now primed to realize how he is lying about all the complex details of origin of life research as well. James is lying, and people who are cheering for him have no clue what he's talking about. Yeah, but that is what you believe, and that's why you lie about science, to protect that belief.
Thank you. Boo! Boo! Sorry.
And so, with that introduction, let's let David James continue. We'll watch his first clip on abiogenesis.
Third, and most importantly, creationists presume that abiogenesis, as promoted by science, involved some molecules floating together and becoming a cell in an instant. This is not the case.
Well, Fred, it's exactly like you said. He lives in a state of almost constant hypocrisy. Because there's no way he can believe that any creationist who made it past third grade has ever made this claim. So it's just another straw man. Because actually, Fred, creationists have been waiting for an explanation of abiogenesis for, I don't know, we've been waiting for something approaching the half-life of carbon-14.
Yep. Hey, and before we show the next clip, Doug, I did also want to mention our two shows that we did with Dr. Royal Truman.
Oh, yeah.
He's a biochemist. He's got a PhD from Michigan State University. And those are great interviews. He does a lot of dismantling of abiogenesis, so you can go back and watch those. It's really good stuff. And one of the things I remember, I asked him, what are your fellow classmates that you're getting this PhD with? Do they try to promote evolution? And he goes, it really doesn't come up because it's almost, it would be embarrassing for anyone to try to promote an idea that this happened by chance. He says he interacted with a lot of people. And this didn't just include his college life getting his PhD, but also his professional life working as a professional chemist. It's a joke for anybody to try to defend origin of life happening by chance. It's impossible to defend abiogenesis. So that was an interesting take from him, that it's really a fringe group. And in fact, Lee Cronin, he said that origin of life research is a scam. He tweeted that out.
That's right.
So anyways, I wanted to mention that before we go on. So Doug, this next video clip is on Professor David James. He's doing a sleight of hand that he tries to pull on his audience, that unfortunately many of those of his faithful followers and maybe some others that are just watching his videos, unfortunately they'll fall for this sleight of hand. Let's roll the tape.
Without sentience, nature relies exclusively on mutation and selection. We will later expand on this idea quite a bit, but let's introduce a relevant key concept now. Here is a demonstration of how mutation and selection works in the laboratory. Say you need an enzyme to promote a particular transformation. You need 100% yield and 100% specificity performed highly efficiently. Scientists in this position will screen some number of known enzymes, anywhere from 100 to 100,000. The odds of getting a perfect match are infinitesimally low, but finding one that will perform the transformation very poorly are quite high. Perhaps the screening yields one enzyme that promotes the transformation with 5% yield and 5% specificity. You take that enzyme and subject it to random mutations. Out of the hundreds of mutants, one offers 10% yield and 20% specificity. Isolate and repeat the process. After 15 rounds of this, you have your perfect enzyme. There was no design involved, simply random mutation and selection.
Wow, Doug. Unbelievable. Notice what he said there. They will isolate, then rerun the mutations. They'll isolate them.
Wow.
So this is one of the ways, this is also referred to as truncation selection by biologists. It's something that it doesn't happen in nature.
Right.
So if they don't isolate their enzymes and these mutations, then more random mutations are going to blur the ability for natural selection to select anything of value. So they're using artificial selection. Yeah. Artificial, that means intelligence. And he's saying that there's no design. What is it with these guys that is so obvious that you can just listen to them, listen to that part.
Isolate and repeat the process.
But if you're a faithful atheist evolutionist, that's going to go right by you. And if you're just a gullible person who thinks that Professor Dave knows what he's talking about, you're going to get fooled by this sleight of hand.
Yeah.
Again, it's a form of artificial selection. And Doug, what does artificial selection require?
Intelligence.
Yep.
Right? Design. But the act of selection is design. It's not like you're a magician. It's shocking, Fred. And recall, Fred, from the show that we did with Royal Truman, you not only need ideal temperatures and pH, but it has to be fast. It has to be fast. So what Origin of Life researchers do is they immediately stop the experiment. They terminate the experiment when they get just what they want, because if it goes like 1 second longer, it would immediately scramble whatever they came up with. It's just, talk about sleight of hand.
Yeah, boy, that's a great point to remember that, Doug, because that was one of the good takeaways from Dr. Royal Truman's show, was how they stop these experiments right at the right time, because if you don't, things are going to jumble quickly. So they have to, by design, pick a time when to terminate the experiment. And, Dr. Royal Truman really elucidated that point really well. And he also made the point that after literally thousands of carefully designed experiments, the best they could do, Doug, was come up with like these small peptides in a very minuscule amount. Yeah. So Professor David James, he protested to the tornado in a junkyard analogy. I think he did that in his part one of his video, maybe. And that's exactly what they're proposing here, except in this case, it's a lot of little tornadoes. Mm-hmm. All these tornadoes that are running through the junkyard of these enzymes, and somehow that's leading to life. Because that's what they have to believe. They can't cheat and artificially select things. That's not how nature would work. Nature's not intelligent.
That's right.
And he'll say that. He'll say nature, it doesn't have intelligence. Well, he doesn't realize he is claiming that nature has intelligence for his whole idea to work.
That's right.
For his idea to work, you need a designer. There's no way you can get around it. And that's why Dr. Royal Truman said that people who are professional chemists, they don't deal with this because it's embarrassing to them. You get a few that they're atheists and they want to promote Origin of Life research. And as Lee Cronin, who's a secular scientist from Harvard, he said it's a scam. We agree with him. We agree.
Yeah, because nature would not stop the tornado right when it put the alternator on the Buick. That just wouldn't happen. Nature would just continue, and you'd end up with a Chevy that doesn't run. There's a Ford broke down on the side of the road. Actually, what you end up with is a pile of enzymes that don't really do anything, is what you end up if you just let nature run its course. But
or you end up with a Javelin. Remember that car?
Even worse, a Gremlin.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, Gremlin. Oh, yeah.
All right, now, Fred, so he later mentions amino acids on steroids. Can somebody call Walt Brown?
Yeah. So then he continues the video with some prebiotic chemistry, then mentions alleged creation talking points. So let's see what he says.
Let's mention some creationist talking points regarding the aforementioned prebiotic chemistry. First, they will claim that any laboratory synthesis is not applicable to abiogenesis. They will pretend to take issue with aspects of experimental design and reagents used, claiming the reagents were unavailable on a prebiotic Earth, the equipment was unavailable, the manipulations of the flask would not have occurred, and so forth. Essentially, anything done in any lab does not count. This is highly dishonest. In the laboratory, we can test what molecules do. If they do something in a flask, it is dictated by the properties of those molecules. They will do the same chemistry anywhere. When we measure the boiling point of some compound, it isn't unique to a laboratory setting. It's the temperature at which that compound boils at that particular pressure, anywhere in the universe. The lab isn't magic, and neither is nature. We can't force molecules to do things in a lab that they don't do in nature under the same conditions.
Yep. He's totally missing the point here, Doug, obviously.
Yeah.
So, and he says it's highly dishonest. Well, it's the fact that here's the point he's totally missing. That even when you use manipulation in the lab, which they're doing, they're manipulating things in the lab to try to prove origins of life research, you still, even with all that manipulation, you can't get anything more than a minuscule amount of a small peptide. That's all you can get. And that's with them cheating to get there.
Yeah.
It's a scam.
That's right, Fred. It's a minuscule, relatively useless chunk of what might be a peptide. So, hey, but wait, Fred, everyone's on the edge of their seat since we started the show. Everyone's waiting for the interesting fact of the week.
Oh, okay. Well, here we go, Doug. Are you ready?
I am ready. Lay it on me, brother.
Okay, here is the interesting fact of the week. What is the main ingredient in household dust?
The main ingredient in household dust.
Let's do it again.
For some reason I want to say spider webs. But I'm thinking that it's probably not spider webs because that would be crazy. That would be like living in a horror movie if that was true. Household dust. Silica.
Silica.
Okay.
Silica. I mean, you made me think for a second because it's dead skin.
Dead skin? Like
Dead skin. Yeah.
That's gross.
I know it is. I guess I should have said, well, think about these videos we're watching and how gross they are.
Hey, now wait a second, Fred. I'm following a biblical line of thought here, and man was created from the dust of the earth, which is primarily silica.
Yeah.
So maybe I
Silica?
can. You know what, Fred?
Okay.
On Judgment Day, I'm going to apply for partial credit on that one.
Yeah, so silica is a compound of the two most abundant elements in Earth's crust, which is silicon and oxygen. But I think we're carbon-based, so I'm not sure I'm going to...
And the skin that sloughs off your body, by the way, is not your dermis. Dermal tissue is made up primarily of collagen, but there's another completely different cell type that forms the epidermis, and it's called keratinocytes, and then they become corneocytes. It's amazing, Fred. The barrier layer of your skin, some of the cells turn into lipids, and some of them just dry up and float away, and they work perfectly to create this wet-dry barrier that keeps all the bad stuff out. If that happened by accident, I got a bridge to sell you in Brooklyn. It's unbelievably sophisticated and amazing. And
Yep. And this is a field you work in, so you know a lot about that stuff.
But I was not aware that that's what we're wiping up all the time when we're trying to clean up. But that's kind of creepy and weird, but yeah.
Yeah, well, while you were saying that, I did a quick search on my on the internet here. And it says silica is a vital component of the skin's extracellular matrix, which provides structure and support to the skin cells. So you do get partial credit.
Okay.
There we go.
Wow. So
Yeah, there we go.
I actually did not know that about the skin's extracellular matrix, and I've pawned myself off as something of an expert on that for like 20 years. So I appreciate that, Fred. If that one comes up, now I'll be ready.
Well, you learn something new every day on Real Science Radio. We learn something new every day. Every time we do a show, there's something that pops up that we learn. So,
Amen.
So let's get back to Professor David James. Yeah. So this last clip and just what he's doing in this abiogenesis video, it's clear intellectual dishonesty. You can't say it any other way. He's trying to fool his audience with claims of somehow this has been observed in nature. That's one of the things he also says. It's observed in nature. Come on. when you're the person actually telling the lies, you try to shift the narrative by repeating over and over again that it's the other side telling the lies, like he tried to do against Dr. James Tour. Doug, when I think about this, I think about, that propaganda phrase that comes out of a propaganda handbook, and apparently it's attributed to, if you remember, Joseph Goebbels and the whole Nazi regime, and whether or not it came from him or, maybe paraphrased from Hitler's book, whatever, we know it came somewhere from Nazism and propaganda. And that's this thing where if you tell a lie loud enough, often enough, and long enough, people will start to believe it. And he does this in his videos, and he did it repeatedly when he debated Dr. James Tour, as we mentioned earlier. And, and Dr. Tour, he's a legitimate scientist, he's a legitimate professor. And so these are the tactics that these atheists will resort to. It's unfortunate, but that's what he's doing here. And just to claim that this is observed in nature, it's ridiculous. So I want to jump right into the next clip. And he claims randomness, given enough time, will create something with near certainty. Unbelievable. So let's run that clip.
Another erroneous point that creationists make has to do with the concept of information. It is accurate to say that an RNA strand which is self-replicating contains and transmits information. Actually, any RNA strand contains information, whether it is functional or not. The information is the sequence of nucleotides in the strand, which will be some combination of A, U, G, and C. Just like how words contain information by virtue of their letters, the same can be said for these biopolymers with varying subunits. What matters most is functional information, which represents the probability of a configuration achieving a particular function. Creationists will therefore relentlessly ask, where did the information come from? Some will even refer to it as specified information, implying that it had to be specified by a creator since it yields such precise functionality. Other creationists pretend that information is some kind of essence or material substance that the molecule possesses, other than the sequence itself, and which must have its origin explained. When ribonucleotides polymerize, some sequence will result. That's the information. Any sequence of nucleotides possesses information, so the process of nucleotide polymerization necessarily produces information. It is the process of selection based on replication rate and fidelity which makes this information meaningful. So anyone who asks, where did the information come from, does not understand what information is nor what biopolymers are.
Oh, okay. All right. So, Fred, he's like the queen in Alice in Wonderland, right?
Yep.
Alice laughed. There's no use trying, she said. One can't believe impossible things. I dare say you haven't had much practice. Remember what the queen said?
Oh, yeah.
Right? When I was younger, I always did it for half an hour a day. Why, sometimes I've believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. That's what he sounds like. It's like an Alice in Wonderland bit.
It's unbelievable. So randomness left to itself, Doug, it always leads to zero information. He has no idea what he's talking about when he talks about information. And we're going to play a clip here in a second on, he actually delves into, he kind of veers into one of those big holes, Doug, and then ploop, falls right in it. So anyways, so what this YouTube personality, he isn't telling you is that after one improbable event, you have to retain that improbable event to build on it. You have to isolate it. He's not telling you that part. So I love this analogy that Bob did on his TV show years ago, and it's on a TV set itself where you've got all the millions and millions of pixels, and then at some random time in a million, billion, trillion years, maybe you'll get Bob's face. And then how much longer before you get Bob's face with him giving a thumbs up? Well, no, what'll happen is his face, if you ever even got it, it would scramble, because that's what randomness does. It eats away, it removes information, and it results in zero information. Even Shannon information, if you have a whole bunch of random bits, that's zero information, and we may touch on that later, because a lot of evolutionists get that wrong. So,
so Fred, it just in information science, and you know more about this than I do, but my layman's understanding is that it's valuable to understand the concept of Shannon information. But Shannon information in and of itself is not useful information. You need useful information that performs a function. And he's pretending that if you have enough time and enough material, that it'll just happen. But that's just pretending. That's just Alice in Wonderland. And we're not going to let him get away with it here.
Yep. So let's dive into the next clip.
With all of this in mind, creationists have a lot of objections, some of which are no more than voicing current limitations of the field that researchers are perfectly aware of, while others are simply demonstrations of ignorance. First, there is skepticism about the probability of these functional sequences of RNA forming by chance, the ones that are capable of catalysis, specifically autocatalysis. It's a perfectly fine issue to raise, as we should want to know what proportion of potential RNA sequences possess such function, and the same goes for polypeptides. As it turns out, studies have been done to answer precisely this question, and the answer is around 1 in 100 billion. This may sound rare, and it is, but in the molecular world it's not as rare as one might think. Molecules are staggeringly numerous. A glass of water contains around 1 trillion water molecules. That's 10 to the 24th power. Compare that to 100 billion, or 10 to the 11th power, and the difference in magnitude is stark. Biopolymers are not water molecules, of course, but it remains the case that in a microenvironment where it is mechanistically feasible for these molecules to be constantly forming, the number of sequences that will form is absolutely astronomical. And when you have an astronomical number of opportunities for something to occur, even infinitesimal probabilities become a near certainty.
So, Doug, where do I start with this? He's the one who definitely does not understand information at all. He doesn't understand information science, information theory. And I'll link to a video talk that I gave on information for those who may be interested in it. So first, a sequence of RNA letters isn't information until it is interpreted. So let me get into this. So it's basic Shannon information. I used to interact with this guy named Dr. Tom Schneider. He went to CU Boulder. He's an evolutionist and a Marxist, and he works in the RNA biology laboratory at the National Institutes of Health. And he got his thesis at CU when he got his PhD was on Shannon information theory. So he used that to apply to DNA and RNA binding sites. And I would often refer those who are ignorant of information, such as David James, Professor Dave, to Tom Schneider's pages on information. So again, this isn't a creationist talking point only. When he talks about probabilities, he's talking about Shannon's equation, which is H, capital H, which represents uncertainty. Uncertainty by itself is not information. Dr. Schneider made that very clear. While I disagree with plenty of what Schneider has to say, because his worldview makes him want to try to reconcile information with evolution, but he's absolutely right when he says that RNA letters are not information until they are realized. So it's anything that's a pile of data, Doug. If I gave you, wrote on a sheet of paper, just gibberish, just pure random nothing, that's not information to you. If I wrote it in Jive, it's not information to you unless you know how to interpret it Jive. So what information is, it's the reduction of uncertainty. That's even just basic Shannon information. We don't have to even get into specified information that Dembski and others got into, which was a good way to elucidate what information is. But even just looking at Shannon information, Professor Dave doesn't know what he's talking about because uncertainty H, which is the probabilities, is not information. It's probably the antithesis of it. You have to reduce uncertainty to get information. So this is the point that Dr. Royal Truman raised in our videos with him. How did the programming language itself arise? That's where you have syntax, like a go statement, a for loop, whatever. You have to come up with a programming language first to even have information, and they cannot explain how that arose. You can't randomly create a computer language. It requires intelligence. So when Francis Crick, one of the co-discoverers of DNA, he realized that. He was smart enough to know that, hey, we found a code. The DNA has a code. He realized that intelligence has to produce that code. It can't come from random mutations. So what did he do? He's a committed atheist. He pushed everything out to space and said aliens populated the Earth with all of life and with all this code and information to build life from there. So
is that what he did? Aliens in space?
Yeah.
Was he the one who was dropping acid when he was doing that? I know one of them was.
He could have been. Yeah, I'm not sure, but
that's how you end up out in space.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
Anyway, all right. So, Fred, we've gone through now 2 of David James' video series, and I would say the cupboard is bare as far as debunked creationist talking points. The only thing he debunked were straw man arguments and misrepresentations and ignorance of some real science.
Yeah, and he did debunk one creation talking point that we don't agree with, and that's catastrophic plate tectonics. So we give him maybe a half a point there, maybe. Okay. But we don't agree with, we've been fighting against CPT forever, and so it's not a really good debunking because it's one that we don't agree with. So
yeah. So far he's done way more bunking than debunking.
Yep. So that pretty much ends our debunking of his alleged debunking of creationist talking points against abiogenesis. Again, we encourage the audience, go watch the James Tour debate if you can stomach it. Watch our interviews with Dr. Royal Truman. That's where you get even better information. And our interview with Dr. James Tour. Abiogenesis is not even a starting point for these guys. So we're going to get into his next video soon. And that's on his part 3, Doug, is on evolutionary biology and paleontology. He's going to debunk the creationist talking points on that one.
Fred, with our access to Bob Enyart's amazing library on those topics, we're just going to wreck this guy. I mean, no matter what he says. And we can't forget to mention our amazing interview with Sal Cordova and the zinc fingers and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of nails in the coffin of evolution. There's one big spike that goes right, one of the bigger nails. It totally falsifies the theory, and it's all you need, really. We don't even have to do a video, but we're going to anyways. We're going to address some of the points that Professor Dave brings up on evolutionary biology and paleontology, because all you need is a fact, as Sal Cordova so eloquently described. The proteins do not have common ancestors. When you actually look at what's under the hood, open the hood of the car, and you open the hood of life, and proteins do not have common ancestors. It's a huge elephant in the room, and it refutes anything Professor Dave has to say in this next video. We don't even need to watch it. We know that alone will do it, but we're still going to deal with the flaws in his argument so that people are armed with answering these questions, even though all they need is Sal's spike, Sal Cordova's spike. Right. Yeah. We're going to have Sal on again here, and pretty soon, probably in a month or so. We've got other great shows coming up. We've got a gender insanity show coming up. We've got shows on. I think we've got some more man on the street interviews. I know those are real popular. So we're looking forward to a lot of great content coming up. So Doug,
yes.
But I'm also looking forward to getting to part 3 of Professor Dave's video, because we've already refuted it by mentioning Sal's big spike. But we'll tackle it anyway.
We will condescend to get into the specifics in order to help David James' audience. It's his audience that needs help, and that's why we're here at Real Science Radio. We want to help.
Yep, absolutely.
So this is a little off topic, but I went into my I have another studio where I do my audio podcast, and it's detached from the house. And I went in there and I found a half-eaten mouse. And so it's always disturbing when you go into your shed, your shack, your storage facility, and you find a mouse. That's disturbing. But when you found a half-eaten mouse, now you're wondering, okay, I have a mouse, but then I have something that ate half that mouse is also in here. And that's pretty disturbing. So, anyway.
Well, with inflation like it is, and with the economy in California and lots of people crossing the border. I mean, people are getting hungry, Doug.
That's right. That's right. That's actually maybe it was a migrant. I hadn't thought about that. Definitely,
hey, Doug,
a possibility.
Yeah, and since you mentioned your studio, I did want to mention to the audience that you've started a YouTube channel. You've had a great Bible study for years. It's on a podcast, and we need to get people to know about your Bible study, because I think your insights on the Bible are second to none. You had a great mentor in Bob Enyart, and I think you've got great material. You present it really well. So let's we're we're showing a link right now to your podcast on YouTube. So get over there, subscribe to Doug's channel. He's got really great insights, and you won't regret it. It's really be a good learning material. Doug is definitely our theology expert on Real Science Radio. I mean, I pride myself in knowing a decent amount about the Bible, but you're just your dedication and amount of time you spend searching the scriptures to prove things are so is just remarkable, and I highly encourage people to go check out your YouTube channel.
Well, I appreciate it, Fred. We started putting the Bible study up on the weeklyworldview.com, where I've been doing a podcast for, I don't know, 20 years on and off. And then was encouraged actually by one of the producers at Real Science Radio. One of the younger guys said, you got to get on YouTube, and I didn't know why, but I believe that he probably knows something I don't. So we've been on YouTube for a couple of years, but we haven't really, I'm not a big self-promoter, but I would love people to join us. We've got about 2 years of backlog Bible studies that you can binge on if you want, and then you can catch up with our latest stuff. We're at YouTube. You could just search for Doug McBurney. I come up pretty easily. There's
cool.
me,
Okay.
and then there's a funeral director who also comes up on Google. But we're not the same guy, at least not yet.
All righty, Doug. Well, thanks a lot for another great show. So for Doug McBurney, I'm Fred Williams of Real Science Radio. May God bless you.